How to See Your True Self, a Buddhist perspective on Carl Jung's wisdom. When we talk about seeing our true self, we're diving into a journey as ancient as humanity itself. It's a journey that Carl Jung, the great psychologist and philosopher, spent his life exploring. But what does it mean to see your true self? And how can we, as seekers of wisdom, approach such a profound question? In today's world, distractions are everywhere. We're constantly pulled toward the superficial, social media, material possessions, and the endless noise of modern life. Yet, deep within us, there's a whisper, a gentle call urging us to look beyond the illusions and into the depths of who we truly are. Jung believed that the true self isn't something we can see with our eyes or grasp with our intellect. It's not the persona we wear or the roles we play in society. No, the true self is the essence of our being, the core that lies beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and pretense. But how do we begin this journey? How do we uncover what's hidden within us? In Buddhism, this journey is often referred to as the path of self-realization or enlightenment. It's about peeling away the layers of illusion to reveal the radiant truth of who we are. To truly see your true self, you must first confront the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding. Jung called this the shadow, the aspects of ourselves that we suppress, deny, or project onto others. The shadow isn't inherently evil, it's simply what we've disowned. It contains both our darkest fears and our hidden potential. In Buddhism, we might think of the shadow as our kleshas, the mental states that cloud our true nature, such as anger, jealousy, and attachment. These emotions aren't enemies, they're teachers. They show us where we're stuck, where we're holding on, and where we need to let go. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you faced your shadow? When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel the full weight of your fears, insecurities, anger, or pain? Most of us spend our lives running from these feelings. We build walls around ourselves, hoping to keep the darkness at bay. But in doing so, we also imprison the light. Jung taught us that the path to the true self isn't a straight line. It's a spiral, a labyrinth. We must descend into the depths of our consciousness, into the parts of ourselves that we've buried and forgotten. This isn't a journey for the faint of heart. It requires courage, the courage to face what we fear most, ourselves. But why should we do this? Why not stay on the surface where life seems easier and less painful? The answer is simple. Because the surface isn't enough. The surface is a mask, a facade. It's not real. And deep down, you know this. You feel it in the quiet moments, in the stillness when the noise of the world fades away. You feel the emptiness, the longing for something more. That longing is the call of the true self. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But this privilege comes with responsibility. To see your true self, you must be willing to let go of who you think you are. You must be willing to shed the layers of false identity that have been imposed on you by society, family, and culture. This isn't an act of rebellion, it's an act of liberation. You might ask, how do I know who I truly am? The answer isn't something I can give you, it's something you must discover for yourself. But I can tell you this. The true self isn't something you find, it's something you uncover. It's already there, waiting for you. Think of it like a diamond buried beneath layers of dirt. The diamond has always been there, but it takes effort to remove the layers of earth that conceal it. And so, we must begin the work of excavation. In Buddhism, this work is often referred to as vipassana, the practice of insight meditation. It's about looking deeply into the nature of reality, into the nature of ourselves. It's about seeing things as they truly are, not as we wish them to be. This work is deeply personal, but it's not solitary. Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey to the true self, requires relationships. We cannot see ourselves clearly without the mirror of another, but these relationships must be authentic. They must challenge us, provoke us, and most importantly, hold space for us to explore the depths of our being. In Buddhism, we might think of this as Sangha, the community of practitioners who support us on the path. The Sangha isn't just a group of people, it's a mirror that reflects our true nature back to us. Here's the paradox. To see your true self, you must first lose yourself. You must let go of the ego, the part of you that clings to control, certainty, and identity. The ego isn't the enemy. It's a tool, but it's not the master of your soul. To see the true self, you must surrender to something greater than the ego. You must trust in the process, even when it feels like you're wandering in the dark. Jung often spoke of the self with a capital S, the archetype of wholeness. The self isn't just your individual essence, it's the divine within you. It's the part of you that's connected to the collective unconscious, to the greater whole. To see your true self is to see this connection. It's to realize that you're not separate from the world, but an integral part of it. But how do we access this deeper connection? Jung believed that symbols and dreams are the language of the unconscious. They're the bridge between the ego and the self. Pay attention to your dreams, to the images and symbols that emerge from your psyche. They're not random, they're messages from the depths, guiding you toward your true self. In Buddhism, we might think of this as the practice of lucid dreaming or dream yoga. It's about becoming aware within the dream state, using dreams as a tool for self-discovery and spiritual growth. This journey isn't about perfection. It's not about becoming something you're not. It's about remembering who you've always been. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that you've abandoned. It's about embracing your humanity, your light and your shadow, your joy and your pain. To see your true self is to see the world with new eyes. It's to find beauty in the mundane, meaning in the chaos, and purpose in the struggle. It's to live with authenticity, to act with integrity, and to love without fear. It's not an end point, it's a way of being. And so, I invite you to begin this journey. I invite you to look within, to confront your shadow, to embrace your wholeness. I invite you to see your true self, not as an abstract idea, but as a living, breathing reality. Now, let us ask, what will you find when you dare to look? If we are to see our true self, then we cannot shy away from the shadow. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow isn't an adversary, but a necessary part of our wholeness. Yet most people spend their lives avoiding it. Why? Because the shadow is uncomfortable. It holds everything we'd rather not admit about ourselves. Our anger, our jealousy, our fears, our desires that don't align with the image we project to the world. But the truth is, these disowned parts don't disappear just because we ignore them. They linger in the unconscious, influencing us in ways we don't even realize. Think about this for a moment. How many of your reactions are truly yours, and how many are the echoes of something buried? A sharp comment from a friend stings more than it should. A minor inconvenience sets off an outsized frustration. Why? Because the shadow, when ignored, doesn't die. It festers, waiting for moments to erupt in ways that confuse us or make us feel ashamed. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's what the shadow does. It runs in the background, shaping your thoughts, your actions, your relationships, all while you remain unaware of its influence. So if we want to see the true self, we must bring the shadow into the light. This isn't about fighting it or defeating it. It's about understanding it. But how do we do that? Start by noticing the patterns in your life. Pay attention to the things that trigger you, the things that make you uncomfortable, These aren't random events. They're clues pointing you toward the parts of yourself that you've disowned. For example, if you find yourself judging someone harshly, ask yourself, what is it about them that bothers me so much? Often, what we judge in others is something we cannot accept in ourselves. The shadow loves to hide in projection. It's easier to see our flaws in someone else than to admit they belong to us. But every time we project, we lose an opportunity to learn something vital about ourselves. Recognizing a projection is like catching the shadow in the act. It's a moment of clarity, a chance to reclaim a part of yourself that was lost. Sometimes, the shadow shows up in our dreams. Jung believed that dreams are a direct line to the unconscious. They're not meaningless. They're rich with symbolism, with messages from the parts of ourselves that we ignore during the day. A recurring nightmare, for instance, might be your shadow trying to get your attention. Are you listening? But let's not romanticize this process. Facing the shadow is hard. It can be messy, even painful. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you've spent your entire life avoiding. You might feel guilt, shame, regret. And yet something remarkable happens when you stop running. The shadow begins to shrink. Its power over you diminishes. It no longer needs to scream for your attention because you're finally listening. Here's the paradox that Jung understood so well. The shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of strength. The anger you suppress can transform into courage. The fear you hide can become wisdom. The parts of yourself you once rejected can become the very things that make you whole. But integration isn't the same as control. You don't dominate the shadow. You make peace with it. You acknowledge its existence and allow it to have a voice, but you don't let it take the wheel. It's like welcoming an old adversary to your table and realizing they were never really your enemy. Now, let's talk about the light. If the shadow is what we hide, then the light is what we aspire to. But here's where things get tricky. The light can be just as blinding as the shadow. Jung warned us about the danger of identifying too strongly with the light, with the idealized version of ourselves. This is what he called the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the world. The persona isn't inherently bad. It serves a purpose. It helps us function in society, maintain relationships, and achieve our goals. But the danger comes when we mistake the persona for the self, when we become so attached to the image we project that we lose sight of who we really are. Think of the person who prides themselves on being kind and selfless. On the surface, this seems admirable. But what happens when their kindness is driven by a fear of conflict or a need for approval? What happens when their selflessness is a way of avoiding their own needs? The light, when unexamined, can cast its own shadow. So seeing the true self requires not only confronting the shadow, but also questioning the light. It requires asking whether the values you hold, the roles you play, the image you present are truly yours, or whether they are borrowed, imposed, or performative. This is where things become uncomfortable, because when you start to question the light, you may realize that much of what you thought was you is actually a carefully constructed facade. And if you're not the persona and you're not the shadow, then who are you? Jung would say that you are the self, the wholeness that exists beyond the dualities of light and shadow, good and bad, right and wrong. The self isn't something you created, it's something you uncover. It's the part of you that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise. But here's the key. You cannot access the self by rejecting the shadow or clinging to the light. You can only access it by holding both, by recognizing that you are both light and shadow, both flawed and magnificent, both human and divine. This isn't an abstract idea. It has practical implications for how you live your life. When you see your true self, you stop being driven by unconscious patterns. You stop being controlled by the need to prove yourself, to be liked, to avoid pain. You begin to act from a place of authenticity, of integrity, of freedom. But freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. On the contrary, seeing your true self brings with it a profound sense of responsibility, not to live up to some external standard, but to live in alignment with who you really are. So let me ask you this. If you stopped pretending, stopped hiding, stopped running, who would you be? And isn't it time to find out?